Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
You see it happening right in front of you. A violent fight. Someone is getting hurt. Your brain screams at you to step in, to be the hero, but your legs feel like lead. You are completely paralyzed by fear. We love stories about fearless heroes, but in real life, fear is a survival instinct. Today, we're diving into a powerful 10-chapter story about the hero's hesitation, the crushing guilt of freezing when someone needs help, and the journey to finding real, safe courage. As we follow Leo's journey through this psychological struggle, you're going to master advanced, real-life English vocabulary, learn how to express deep emotions like guilt and anxiety, and discover how everyday people handle complex social conflicts. Let's begin with Chapter 1.
The Tuesday evening commute was always a test of endurance, but tonight the subway station felt exceptionally suffocating. Leo stood on platform 4, his shoulders hunched against the damp, chilly draft blowing through the concrete tunnel. To pass the time and drown out the chaotic roar of the city, he adjusted his earbuds. He was listening to an English podcast intensely focused on deciphering the host's rapid, natural cadence. For a moment, he was completely detached from his surroundings. Suddenly, a sharp, shattering sound broke his concentration. A few yards away, a glass bottle smashed against the tiled floor. The ambient chatter of the crowd vanished instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Two men were squaring off, their faces flushed with rage. "Say that to my face again," one roared, his chest pressed aggressively against the other's. Before anyone could react, the argument escalated. A violent shove sent the smaller man crashing into a metal bench. Instinct surged through Leo. His muscles tensed, and he took a sharp step forward, intending to intervene. But then a cold wave of paralysis gripped him. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. His mind flooded with terrifying worst-case scenarios. What if they have a weapon? What if I get stabbed? He looked around anxiously. Dozens of bystanders stood frozen, staring at their phones or looking at the ceiling, completely immobilized by the bystander effect. Just then, the train roared into the station, its brakes screeching. The doors slid open, creating a frantic barrier between the fighters and the commuters. The crowd rushed inside, eager to escape the suffocating tension. Leo moved with them, stepping onto the crowded train. As the doors closed, he looked through the glass, leaving the physical conflict behind. However, he was carrying a heavy, sudden weight of guilt deep inside his chest.
The hum of the subway train did nothing to soothe the chaotic noise inside Leo's head. He stared blankly at his own reflection in the dark train window, feeling completely hollow. The ride home passed in a blur, every click of the tracks sounding like a ticking clock reminding him of his failure. When he finally unlocked the door to his apartment, the heavy silence of the empty rooms greeted him. He tossed his keys onto the counter, but the sharp metallic clank made him flinch, instantly bringing back the memory of the shattering glass bottle. Without turning on the lights, Leo sat on the edge of his bed and buried his face in his hands. A deep, suffocating wave of shame washed over him as he began to replay the entire scene on a loop. In his mind, he rewrote history, imagining himself stepping firmly between the two men and diffusing the tension with calm, confident authority. But the stark reality remained. He had done absolutely nothing. He felt like an absolute coward, utterly disgusted by his own perceived weakness. Seeking answers, he pulled out his phone and began typing his symptoms of panic into a search engine. His eyes scanned through various articles until he stumbled upon a term that caught his attention: the bystander effect. He learned that psychological studies show an individual's likelihood of helping decreases when other witnesses are present. The articles explained that responsibility becomes diluted among the crowd, causing a collective paralysis. While the clinical definition provided a logical explanation for his freezing, it offered zero comfort to his aching conscience. The emotional bruise was already starting to form, and Leo knew this silent guilt would not fade easily. The next afternoon, Leo sat in a bustling, sunlit cafe, nervously tapping his fingers against his coffee mug. Across the small wooden table sat Marcus, a close friend whose articulate and thoughtful nature always made him an excellent listener. Leo had been dreading this meetup, yet he desperately needed to unburden his mind. As Marcus chatted happily about his week, Leo struggled internally to find the courage to speak up. He wanted to vent about his intense shame, but he found it incredibly difficult to describe his paralysis without sounding completely weak. "Hey man, you seem miles away today," Marcus observed gently, setting his own cup down. Leo took a deep breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his mug. "I witnessed something terrible at the subway station yesterday evening," Leo began, his voice barely above a whisper. He carefully recounted the story, meticulously detailing the shouting, the shattering bottle, and the sudden violent shove. When he reached the climax of the story, Leo paused, looking down at the floor as he admitted to freezing in fear. "I just stood there like a coward, Marcus, while everyone else did the exact same thing," Leo confessed, his face flushing with renewed embarrassment. Marcus listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to deep empathy. "Leo, look at me," Marcus said firmly, leaning forward across the table. "You are being incredibly hard on yourself for a completely normal physiological survival mechanism." Marcus explained that in high-stress situations, the human brain instantly calculates risks to ensure self-preservation. "Real courage isn't an automatic switch," Marcus added gently. "Fear is simply a metric of danger, not a lack of manhood or proof of cowardice." The conversation didn't instantly cure Leo's heavy guilt, but hearing his friend's perspective began to soften the sharpest edges of his self-reproach. The comforting words from Marcus faded the moment Leo opened his laptop the following evening. As he scrolled through a local news forum, a viral video title stopped his heart: "Chaos at Platform 4. With a trembling hand, Leo clicked the link and watched the grainy, vertical footage of the subway fight play out. From this new perspective, the violence looked even more visceral and frightening than he remembered. The camera panned across the platform, and Leo flinched as he spotted himself standing near the tiled pillar. He looked small, stiff, and utterly helpless, frozen in place like a statue while the smaller man hit the bench. Leo made the mistake of scrolling down to read the public comments section beneath the video player. The anonymous comments were incredibly brutal, filled with harsh judgments from online keyboard warriors. "Look at all those pathetic bystanders just watching," one comment read. "Society is completely broken. I would have knocked that guy out instantly," claimed another user. The public condemnation intensified Leo's internal shame, making his chest feel tight with anxiety. He paused the video at a specific frame and noticed something he had completely missed during the actual event. A few feet away from him stood a middle-aged woman wearing a distinct bright red winter coat. The video captured her face clearly. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and absolute helplessness. The very next morning, during his usual Tuesday commute, Leo was waiting on the exact same platform. He looked up and froze when he saw the exact same bright red coat standing near the ticket machine. It was her, the woman from the viral video, holding a travel mug with trembling fingers. As she turned her head, her gaze locked directly onto Leo, and her eyes widened slightly in instant recognition. Neither of them spoke a single word, but a heavy, unspoken understanding passed between them. They were bound together by their shared silence and the collective guilt of surviving a moment they couldn't control.
The heavy, silent encounter on the train platform forced Leo to realize he couldn't keep running from his shame. Instead of letting the guilt consume him, he decided to channel his restless energy into finding actionable answers. On a rainy Thursday evening, he pushed open the heavy wooden doors of a local community center. He had signed up for a neighborhood workshop titled Active Bystander Training and Conflict De-escalation. The room was filled with ordinary citizens, all sitting in a wide circle of folding chairs, looking eager yet anxious. At the front stood the instructor, an articulate woman named Sarah, who spent years working in crisis intervention. Most people think intervening requires a physical confrontation, Sarah announced, scanning the room with a calm gaze. But throwing a punch or playing the Hollywood hero often escalates violence instead of stopping it. Leo leaned forward, hanging on every single word as Sarah dismantled his preconceived notions of bravery. She introduced the concept of the 4 Ds of bystander intervention: direct, distract, delegate, and delay. You don't always have to confront the aggressor directly to make a profound difference, Sarah explained thoroughly. Creating a simple distraction, asking the victim for directions, or calling authorities are incredibly potent tools. During the practical segment of the class, Leo was paired with a partner to practice verbal boundary setting. He practiced using a steady, assertive vocal cadence to repeat firm English phrases designed to disrupt hostility. "Excuse me, is everything okay here?" Leo practiced, forcing his voice to remain level and grounded. "Let's step back and take a breath," he rehearsed, feeling the foreign words gradually become comfortable in his mouth. For the first time since the subway incident, the tight knot of helplessness in his chest began to loosen slightly. He realized that preparing his mind and his voice was far more valuable than possessing physical dominance. The training workshop provided Leo with practical strategies, but changing his internal chemistry proved far more difficult. In the weeks that followed, the bustling city streets began to feel like a minefield of potential threats. Leo found himself suffering from acute hypervigilance every time he stepped outside his apartment door. The sudden screech of bus brakes or a loud, boisterous laugh from a group of teenagers would make him jump. His heart would instantly start racing, flooding his system with adrenaline as if a real fight were about to erupt. He noticed that his natural inclination was to avoid crowded areas altogether to keep himself safe. He began taking longer, isolated routes home, consciously avoiding the subway station during peak rush hours. One evening, while walking down a dimly lit avenue, he heard a man shouting angrily from an alleyway. Instinctively, Leo's muscles locked up, and that familiar, suffocating panic began to creep up his throat. He desperately wanted to sprint in the opposite direction, to erase himself completely from the situation. However, he stopped himself, taking a long, measured breath to ground his frantic thoughts. He remembered Sarah's advice about managing physiological stress before attempting to help anyone else. He utilized a mindfulness technique he learned, focusing on the solid concrete beneath his sneakers. Instead of running away blindly, he stood his ground at a safe distance and carefully assessed the scene. It turned out to be a restaurant kitchen worker yelling into his phone, completely harmless to the public. Leo let out a long, shaky exhale, realizing that his mind was amplifying ordinary city noises into dangerous crises. He understood that he couldn't let fear dictate his movements or shrink his world into a prison of avoidance. By forcing himself to stay present, he took his first real step toward conquering the ghost of his past paralysis. The persistent rain had cleared by Saturday morning, leaving the local park smelling of damp earth and fresh grass. Leo sat on a green bench near a gravel pathway, watching families and joggers enjoy the weekend sunshine. He was nursing a lukewarm coffee, letting his mind wander away from the stress of the previous weeks. Suddenly, a man walked past his bench, limping slightly with a thick brace wrapped securely around his left knee. Leo's breath caught in his throat as his eyes tracked the man's distinct facial features. It was the smaller man from Platform 4, the victim of the violent shove that had haunted Leo's dreams. The man stopped near a trash receptacle, struggling to discard a plastic wrapper while balancing a walking cane. Without allowing his anxiety time to paralyze him, Leo stood up and approached the man with measured steps. "Excuse me, do you need a hand with that?" Leo asked, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. The man looked up, surprised by the sudden offer, before offering a weary but incredibly warm smile. "Thanks, I appreciate it," David replied, in clear, articulate English, handing Leo the wrapper. Leo discarded it, but instead of walking away, he took a deep breath to address the elephant in the room. "I am so sorry to bother you, but I was on Platform 4 that Tuesday evening," Leo confessed softly. The man's expression softened instantly, his shoulders dropping as the tension drained from his posture. "Ah, the subway incident," David murmured, extending a hand. "My name is David, by the way." Leo shook his hand and immediately began pouring out his deep, unyielding guilt for not intervening physically. David listened patiently, shaking his head gently before cutting off Leo's frantic stream of self-reproach. "Leo, I didn't need a martial artist to throw punches and risk getting stabbed," David said earnestly. "In that terrifying moment, I just wished someone had yelled for help, created a distraction, or stood near me." Hearing David's perspective completely transformed Leo's understanding of what solidarity actually meant in a crisis. He didn't need to be a fearless warrior. He just needed to be a present, conscious human being, willing to assist safely. 3 weeks after his profound conversation with David, Leo found himself running errands late on a dreary Thursday night. The city was uncharacteristically quiet as he pushed open the glass doors of a 24-hour neighborhood grocery store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long shadows across the nearly deserted aisles. Leo walked toward the back of the store, looking to quickly grab a carton of milk before heading home. Suddenly, a harsh, abrasive voice shattered the late-night stillness of the market. "Are you completely stupid or just incredibly slow?" a tall man in a heavy leather jacket barked. Leo stopped dead in his tracks, his muscles instantly tightening as his internal alarms began to blare. He peered around the corner of the aisle and witnessed a deeply unsettling scene unfolding at the checkout counter. The aggressive customer was leaning menacingly over the counter, his face mere inches away from a young cashier. The cashier looked no older than 19, her hands trembling violently as she struggled to fix a register error. "I am so sorry, sir. The system is currently lagging," she stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't care about your pathetic excuses," the man slammed his fist hard against the plastic counter. The loud bang echoed through the empty store, instantly mirroring the terrifying sound of the shattering subway bottle. Right on cue, that familiar, suffocating wave of physical paralysis began to creep up Leo's limbs. His heart hammered frantically against his ribs, and his mind desperately screamed at him to drop his items and flee. "Walk away, Leo," the cowardly voice whispered inside his head. "It is not your problem. Preserve your own safety." He looked toward the front exit, realizing he could easily slip out into the dark night completely unnoticed. But as he looked back at the terrified face of the young cashier, he saw the exact same helplessness he saw in David. The second test had officially arrived, and this time running away would completely break his spirit.
Leo stood at the edge of the grocery aisle, forcing a deep, steady breath into his lungs to shatter the creeping paralysis. He knew he could not engage the aggressive customer physically, nor did he want to escalate the man's volatile rage. Instead, he recalled Sarah's active bystander training and decided to utilize the power of a calculated distraction. Leaving his milk on a shelf, Leo stepped forward out of the shadows, making his footsteps deliberately loud on the tile. He walked right up to the checkout counter, consciously positioning his body a safe, respectful distance away from the angry man. Instead of looking at the aggressor, Leo locked his gaze entirely onto the terrified cashier, ignoring the man's intimidating posture. "Excuse me, hi," Leo interrupted, his vocal cadence remarkably calm and steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Can you tell me which aisle has the organic honey? I am completely lost and in a bit of a hurry." The sudden mundane question completely disrupted the hostile atmosphere, breaking the heavy tension like a circuit breaker. The aggressive customer stopped shouting mid-sentence, blinking in utter confusion as his target of anger was suddenly removed. The cashier looked up at Leo, her eyes wide with instant relief as she quickly grasped what he was trying to do. It is down aisle 4, sir, right past the baking section," she replied, her voice still shaky but visibly stabilizing. "Perfect. Thank you so much," Leo said warmly, remaining right where he was, acting as a calm physical buffer between them. The customer muttered a foul curse under his breath, suddenly feeling the collective weight of someone else watching his shameful behavior. Realizing he no longer held total psychological control over the situation, the man grabbed his grocery bag and stormed out. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind him, and the suffocating pressure inside the store vanished into the night. The young cashier collapsed slightly against the counter, letting out a long, shuddering exhale as tears finally spilled over. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at Leo with profound gratitude. "I thought he was going to jump over the counter." Leo offered a reassuring smile, his hands still trembling slightly, but his chest finally feeling completely light and free.
Leo stepped out of the 24-hour grocery store, the cool midnight air instantly brushing against his flushed face. The city around him was perfectly tranquil now, a striking contrast to the emotional storm he had just weathered inside. As he began his walk home down the quiet avenue, he noticed his boots clicking rhythmically against the concrete pavement. Unlike the heavy, suffocating ride home from Platform 4 weeks ago, his footsteps felt incredibly light and purposeful tonight. He understood now that the paralyzing fear he experienced during the subway incident was not a permanent mark of cowardice. It was simply an innate biological response designed to keep him alive in a chaotic and unpredictable world. Real heroism did not require the complete absence of fear or the reckless physical dominance celebrated in Hollywood movies. Instead, true courage was the ability to acknowledge that panic, master it, and make a conscious, safe choice to help.
He had managed to protect a vulnerable person without compromising his own physical safety or escalating a volatile situation. When he arrived back at his apartment, he unlocked the front door and stepped into the familiar, quiet space. He tossed his keys onto the counter, and this time the familiar metallic chime did not make him flinch with guilt. Leo walked over to his laptop, looking at the bookmarked Active Bystander forum that had guided his journey. He felt a profound sense of closure, knowing he had successfully integrated a painful lesson into his daily life. He had transformed his initial helplessness into an actionable skill, finding power in his steady cadence and firm boundaries. The world would always have moments of sudden conflict, but Leo was no longer terrified of how he would react. He closed his eyes and fell asleep easily, finally carrying a deep, unshakable peace within his chest. Leo's journey shows us that freezing in the face of danger is not a character flaw, it is human biology. The real turning point came when he stopped punishing himself for his fear and started preparing his mind for the future. By shifting his focus from physical combat to communication and de-escalation, he found a safer, more sustainable kind of bravery. In a world full of unexpected conflicts, sometimes the most powerful tool we possess is not a fist, but a calm, steady voice. Leo found his peace not by becoming a fighter, but by becoming a conscious, active bystander. It reminds us that real-life problems don't require us to be superheroes, they just require us to be prepared. Now it's your turn to practice. Which of today's advanced vocabulary words challenged you the most? Was it hypervigilance, volatile, or unshakable? Drop a sentence using one of these words in the comments below, and I will personally review and reply to your sentences. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. If Leo's story helped you improve your English and see real-world social problems from a new perspective, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. To keep learning and diving into more real-life human dramas, click right here to watch our next story series. See you in the next story. Goodbye.